Well, hello. Today we're going to be looking at order of operations. Now, we've talked about lots of operations. We talked about addition. We've talked about subtraction. We've talked about multiplication. We've talked about division. We have talked about powers and exponents and roots. So we've talked about these 6 different operations. And again, exponents, powers, and roots, those are really all contained in one. They're all exponents, they're all powers. Now, the only other thing is, what if you want to do something else before another one? Well, that's a different category, and it's just called grouping. Grouping is just used generally with parentheses, brackets, squiggly brackets, some kind of way to denote that, hey, I want you to specifically do this first. And those are our ways of working with numbers. That's what an operation is. It's a way to do something. And when it comes to these operations, I may look at a problem, say, here I have a parentheses, a quantity of 3 plus 5 raised to the second power minus 7 times 14 divided by square root of 4. And that's a lot going on there. I may decide that, hey, I like to do this first because that'll make this a lot easier to do than to multiply the 7 times 14. Or I want to do 5 squared first or 3 squared first before I add it together and square because there'll be smaller numbers to work with. And everyone can have their own opinion on how they want to do this problem. And then we would all have different answers, right? Well, we can't do that. That wouldn't be sound. It wouldn't be in order. So it's important to have an order and have direction, and also to be meek enough to receive that direction and then follow it. So mathematicians got together and decided there would be a specific order in how we do these things. If we really want to make sure someone does one thing first, we will put parentheses around it, brackets, some kind of way to group it together. And so that is the first thing you look for. You look for what is in parentheses first. And then from there, you do the whatever order of operations is happening within the parentheses. Okay? That means you would just follow again. Within that parentheses, you will follow order of operations again. After parentheses, we have exponents. Okay? Exponents. Remember, exponents include powers and roots. So either of those. So if you see an exponent or root, you would do those before you do anything. After that, we have, actually, I'll put E and R so that, because right now, for many of you, it might be confusing to see exponents or roots as the same thing. So you would do either of these. Next would come multiplication or division. Okay? The reason being, because division is really just inverse multiplication. So they're at the same level. And these levels honestly go down by difficulty. Because remember, parentheses is just so that, hey, you need to do this first. Exponents and roots, those were just repeated multiplication and division. Then we have multiplication and division, which were repeated addition and subtraction. And so those would be last. Now, the ones in parentheses, I put them in that order for a specific reason. Because sometimes in a problem, a root may come before an exponent, or a multiplication may become before a division. Like in this problem, we have multiplication and division. And we have an exponent before we have the root. Some problems, you may have addition before subtraction or subtraction before addition. Well, which one do you do first in? Sometimes people teach, oh, you do in a certain order. They say PEMDAS or something like that. Honestly, it's always, from when it comes to that stage of it, the ones within parentheses here, you go from left to right. So the order in which you see it. Now, some of you may say, screw it, I'm going to do what I want. I'm going to follow PEMDAS. And you will notice that many a times your problem comes out to be the exact same. Your answer comes out to be the same. It didn't change the result. And that is, when that happens, it's because the multiplication and division, remember, they're really the same thing. Division is just inverse multiplication. Just like with addition and subtraction, one's just the inverse of the other. Just like exponents with roots, one's just the inverse of the other. And so sometimes doing it in the other, doing it in a specific order all the time, like saying I'm always going to do multiplication before division, will be okay. But it's not generally. So it's always best to say from left to right. The last time that I taught this, I pulled out an exact example that it worked with. I should have written it down, honestly, so I could use that here. But that's okay. You will probably see it throughout your work, as long as you remember that when you get to an exponent or root, you go from left to right, whichever one appears first. So in this problem, we'll do our exponent before we do our root. This will be one of those problems where it wouldn't matter because they're so far apart from each other. However, we just want to keep that trend going of always doing it from left to right as we see that level of difficulty. Same thing with multiplication and division. Here we'll multiply before we divide. Same thing with addition and subtraction here as well. Okay, so here we are. We have this problem, quantity 3 plus 5 squared minus 7 times 14 divided by square root of 4. And we're going to do this. So first things first is our parentheses, or any grouping that you see. And you always go with the innermost. So say if there was another parentheses inside of here, we would go with that first before we did anything else. So remember, if you see parentheses, you start order of operations over again. Well, in this parentheses, it's actually quite simple. We only see one operation. We see addition, so we're going to do that. So the first thing we would do is we would add 3 plus 5, and we would get 8. Now that parentheses is done, so I'll just rewrite everything else. Now, a lot of times people will teach that you don't rewrite it. I rewrite it so I can see, hey, I have done my first step, and now I'm going to decide what must be done next. That is why I rewrite it. Some people will show you carrots or to tell you just to break things down. If that works for you, that's fine. I would suggest writing it for one reason only, so that you can say, hey, I did that step there. It's easier to see your work that way. All right, so next, we're going to look for exponents or roots, whichever comes first when reading from left to right. So from the left, I see an exponent before I see that root. So I'm going to do the exponent first. And so 8 squared would give me 64. Then I'll have minus 7 times 14 divided by square root of 4. Okay. Well, still looking at exponents or roots, I see a root. So I'm going to take care of that. So I have 64 minus 7 times 14 divided by the square root of 4, which give me 2. Okay. So next, we've done all our exponents and roots. There's no parentheses, so we're going to multiplication and division. Multiplication, division. I see multiplication before I see division. And this will be one of those times where people will say, it's definitely so much easier to divide this and then multiply than to multiply then divide. And you are true. And this actually would be one of those instances where it would not matter which one you do. Only reason I know that is because we must complete whatever's going on here between these three numbers before we end up subtracting in the end. So that is why I know that, hey, it won't really matter which order I do this. However, I'm going to, again, as I said, teach you the method of always doing it left to right so that you get used to it. So when you get to those circumstances where you wouldn't know that it's not good to just do whatever you want, you won't do that. So here we would have 64 minus 7 times 14, and that would be 98 divided by 2. Okay. For those of you that are wondering how I did that 7 times 48, 7 times 14, what I did was I said 14 is really just 7 times 2. So 7 times 7 is 49. Double it because it's times 2. That gives me 98. All right, so now we have subtraction and division left over. I'm going to divide first, so I'll have 64 minus 98 divided by 2 is 49. And last but not least, we have subtraction here. That's our last step, right? Addition or subtraction. There is no addition, so we'll do subtraction. So 64 minus 49, and at this point, we will get 15. And so our answer would be 15. And that is order operations. I made this problem up so we could see all of the operations used, and so you could see how you would have to do them in a certain order. But we'll do one more involving order operations. Remember, going from left to right. And I want to do this next problem for a specific reason, because sometimes problems will be written a specific way. And so here we go. We have 140 minus 21 times 5 divided by 122 minus 119 plus 4. Now, remember, we said that when you see this, it looks like a fraction, right? Fractions are just division problems. So this symbol says, hey, we're going to divide. Oh, okay. Well, I see some subtraction addition down here. And I see subtraction multiplication here. So, of course, we're going to multiply. Then we're going to divide. Then we're going to subtract, blah, blah. Hold up. When we saw this symbol before, we said it takes the top number divided by the bottom number. So, in other words, if you ever see a problem written this way or a formula or equation, this is really saying take parentheses and do 140, or do the top in parentheses divided by the bottom in parentheses. So top in parentheses divided by bottom in parentheses. And from here, you do order of operations. Order of operations says do parentheses first, going from left to right. If I were to read this left to right, it would be top to bottom. So we'll do that parentheses first. And within that parentheses, we see subtraction and multiplication. Well, which one comes first? Multiplication. It's a higher order. It's a more difficult thing to do. So we'll multiply first. So in this case, we will get 140 minus 21 times 5 would be 105 over 122 minus 119 plus 4. Okay. Well, continuing on there, 140 minus 105 will give us 35, and we will be done with that parentheses. And down here, 122 minus 119 plus 4. Okay. Going here, we see subtraction and addition, because this is our next parentheses set, so we're going to go there. Oh, addition comes before subtraction, so we're going to add here first. No, we're going to go left to right. We're going to subtract first and then add. Again, it would have been okay in this case if we had, but I don't want you to get used to that. So we have 35 over 122 minus 119 will give us 3 plus 4. And then we have 35 over what we're going to add. 3 plus 4 is 7. And so we have 35 over 7, or 35 divided by 7. Because now all the parentheses are gone. The next step is to look for exponents or roots. So we don't have any. Next step is to look for multiplication or division. We see division. 35 divided by 7 gives us 5. And there we have it. Order of operations. These are going to be the methods that you see. It's very important to remember again, and if you see something written in a fraction format, a division problem written in this way, you put the top in parentheses and the bottom in parentheses, and you proceed with order of operations there. So that is order of operations, and we will see you soon.